My father didn't even clear his throat before doing it. He just slid a leather folder across the dining table, the brass corners catching the overhead light, and said my brother's name like it was a prayer finally answered. Julian. That was it. No speech, no build-up, no context. Julian had been back in town for 9 days. I had been running their dream for 11 years. My mother's hand found the stem of her wineglass and squeezed, but it was her nod that roared over everything else. The candle flames flickered, but she didn't look away from my father's face. They shared that silent, satisfied look I'd grown up watching from the doorway. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I set my ring of cafe keys beside the folder. The metal hit the wood with a clean, bright clink that sliced straight through the soft jazz playing in the background. Next to the keys, I placed a slim manila envelope. No label, no decoration, just weight. Everyone assumed I was surrendering. They thought they were watching the dutiful daughter finally step aside so the golden son could take his rightful place. But when Julian opened what I'd left for him later, he didn't read it twice. He couldn't. I grew up in kitchens that smelled like vanilla extract, espresso, and bleach. The ovens in our flagship bakery hummed from 4 in the morning until closing time. There was always music playing from some old speaker my father refused to replace. Soft salsa in the mornings, jazz by noon, something slower and dreamy by night. I used to stand on upside-down flour buckets just to reach the stainless steel counter, pressing cookie dough into even circles while my father measured his fame in compliments and comment cards. He walked through the front of the cafe with a towel over his shoulder, greeting regulars by name, laughing at their jokes, refilling their coffee before they asked. He called it hospitality. I called it performance. Maya, shoulders back, he'd murmur when I carried plates through the crowd. You're part of the show, Mihija. But I wasn't the star. Julian was the star. He'd breeze in after school, apron slung carelessly around his neck like an accessory instead of a tool. His hair always looked artfully messy, never sweaty. My mother would hand him a fresh pastry on a plate, sprinkle powdered sugar over it like confetti, and snap pictures for the cafe's Instagram. Our future, she wrote under one photo. The next generation, under another. Sometimes I appeared in the background of those shots, hunched over an inventory sheet, wiping a table, hauling crates of milk. Half-cropped, out of focus, a smudge in my own story. Even as kids, the script was obvious. Julian got the cooking camps, the creative development retreats with my father, the special trips to new cities to study cafe culture. He came back with photos from trendy coffee shops, sketches of potential logo redesigns, new latte art ideas. My parents gathered around his thoughts like they were heat in winter. I got the schedule. Literally. By 13, I was the one making the weekly rota for part-time staff, adjusting for exam weeks, soccer games, and dentist appointments. My mother bragged about it to anyone who'd listen. Maya is so reliable, she'd say, like it was a personality flaw she'd cleverly weaponized. She just handles things. When Julian complained about having to work Saturday mornings, my father said, he needs his rest. He's the visionary. When I said I had a science project due, my father nodded toward the dish pit. You'll figure it out, you always do. At 14, I started opening the cafe with him. By 16, I was doing it alone. There was one birthday that lives in my memory like a photograph left too close to the window, faded at the edges, but one part always sharp. Julian's 17th. We closed the cafe early. My parents hung fairy lights across the ceiling. Musicians set up in the corner. Former employees, regulars, family, neighbors, they all squeezed inside. There was a custom cake shaped like a coffee cup, topped with a sugar version of Julian's face. My mother made a slideshow that played on a projector against the white brick wall. His smile at age 3. His first latte art. His high school cooking competition win. People cheered like he'd won an award for keeping the universe running. 2 months later, on my 19th birthday, I found a grocery store cake shoved into the walk-in. No candles. My name spelled wrong on the thin blue frosting. We'll celebrate when things calm down, my mother said, brushing a kiss against my cheek as she walked past with a carton of eggs. Can you cover the evening shift? Rose's car broke down. I said yes, because that's what I did. I didn't resent Julian then. Not really. He didn't write the script. He just delivered his lines on cue and soaked in the applause. That's the thing about roles. If no one shows you the exit, you assume there isn't one. I learned early that wanting made me inconvenient, so I stopped wanting. Instead, I learned how to read P and L statements, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to fix a temperamental espresso machine at 6 in the morning when your head barista calls in sick. I learned which regulars were on the brink of divorce, which ones needed an extra shot of something stronger than coffee in their cup, which staff members were one bad shift away from quitting. By the time I was 23, the cafes, now 3 locations across the city, ran because of systems I built in quiet. By the time I was 25, my father introduced me to new hires as our operations person, as if I were a consultant he'd reluctantly brought in, instead of the daughter who knew the bakery so well she could manage inventory with her eyes closed and one ear covered. Julian moved to New York to see what the scene was like there. My parents referred to him constantly. Julian says matcha is big there now. Julian thinks we should do more brunch-style plates. Julian heard about this new sustainable roaster. He came home twice a year, bring back phrases like brand identity and experiential dining and taste-forward beverage programming. The staff would glance at me over his shoulder every time he suggested some unattainable expensive renovation. I'd smile, adjust the budget, make his ideas small enough to fit inside our reality, and never get credit. Then my father had his first heart attack. They found the blockage in time, but it wasn't the last. My mother started forgetting small things, her keys, her appointments, whether she'd already locked the doors. The doctor wrote early cognitive decline in neat handwriting that made it feel like it might just be temporary. It wasn't. The cafes struggled, not because customers disappeared. In fact, the opposite. People knew about my father's health. They flocked in. They tipped more. They offered to help however they could. But behind the scenes, things frayed. Bills were misfiled. Invoices stacked up. Health inspectors changed regulations so fast our old binders might as well have been written in crayon. The person they turned to wasn't the son they'd hung their dreams on. It was me. I signed the power of attorney documents in a cramped office next to my mother's neurologist's clinic. The laminate desk was chipped along the edges, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the pen they gave me kept skipping over certain letters like it was tired too. "You're sure?" the lawyer asked, looking at my parents, not me. My father's hand trembled where it rested on the arm of his chair. "She's good with these things," he said, not meeting my eyes. "With details." My mother smiled vaguely. "Our Maya always handles the serious stuff." It wasn't praise. It was assignment. I signed where they told me to sign. Medical decisions, financial decisions, business continuity, all my responsibilities clarified in ink. There's a moment, when you sign papers like that, where you think, this is what being trusted feels like. What it actually feels like is being handed a burning building and told to pretend it smells like cinnamon rolls. For a while, I almost believed this would be enough. That if I held their world steady long enough, if I paid every bill on time, passed every inspection, negotiated every lease renewal, they'd finally see me. They didn't. The shift arrived quietly. Not as a fight, not as an explosion, as a series of absences with my name missing. The first time I noticed it, it was an email. A notification flashed on my phone about the annual health and safety review. For 10 years, I had been the one walking inspectors through our kitchens, explaining our temperature logs, our allergen protocols, our cross-contamination prevention. This time, the email went to my father. And Julian, not me. I told myself it was a simple oversight. Then a week later, there was a calendar alert for a brand repositioning session with our graphic designer. Again, Dad, Mom, Julian, not me. I only found out because our pastry chef asked, "Are we really changing the logo? I kind of like our ugly coffee cup." I laughed, tension tight around my ribs. "What logo meeting?" She blinked at me. "The one next Tuesday. With your brother. He said they're making things more elevated." That night, I was closing down the original cafe by myself. The dining room was dark. The glow from the street lamps cast long shadows across the mismatched chairs we'd collected over the years. I wiped the last table and picked up a folded flyer someone had left behind. Ortiz Hearth and Stone Legacy Brunch. Celebrating the future of the brand, there was a date printed in gold. A list of honored guests. A tagline that made my jaw clench. Passing the torch to the next generation. I looked for my name. It wasn't there. As I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, my phone buzzed. A photo. Julian, standing in front of our new roasting facility, hand resting on the big steel drum roaster like he'd built it with his bare hands. My mother's caption glowed under the picture. Proud of our future leader. So much more to come. My palms went cold. I scrolled up. 4 weeks. That's how long I'd been cut out of more and more conversations without ever being told the script had changed. So when my father slid that leather folder across the table at Sunday dinner, announcing that he and my mother had decided it's time for Julian to step fully into ownership, I wasn't surprised. I just finally stopped pretending I didn't understand. The night they made that announcement, I didn't say much. Out loud, anyway. My father explained that the shares would be transitioning to Julian, that the cafe properties, the ones the business owned at least, would be red-idled. That Julian had ideas about franchising, about licensing, about refreshing the brand for a younger crowd. My mother glanced at me once, quickly, then away. You'll still be involved, of course, she said, stirring her soup like it might hide something. You're invaluable, Maya. Operations don't run themselves. It's not a demotion, Julian added, smiling that careful, sympathetic smile people use when they're sure they've already won. It's putting people where they shine. I'm more front-facing. You're back-of-house genius. Back-of-house. Invisible, efficient, quiet. My fork scraped against the plate. I set it down carefully. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, something inside me became very, very still. After dinner, when the plates were stacked in the sink, I went upstairs to my old room. The same faded turquoise walls, the same posters from a life I never had time to live. A desk pushed under the window, facing the streetlights instead of the kitchen for the first time. I sat down, opened my laptop, and did what I'd been doing my whole life. I made a list, not of tasks this time, of truths. The first list was operational. Supplier contracts, wholesale accounts, roasting schedules, recipe documentation, digital infrastructure, equipment leases. All the invisible threads that actually kept the business alive. The second list was legal. Licensing agreements with the city for outdoor seating, food safety certifications registered under my name, vendor relationships technically contracted through me, because I had been the one present when my parents weren't feeling well enough to attend meetings. The third list was people. The baristas who called me at midnight when their roommates stole rent money. The manager whose child was on a waiting list for surgery and needed flexible hours. The dishwasher who'd never filled out a direct deposit form before and handed his life in cash to my trust. The fourth list was what my parents valued. The logo on the window, the Instagram account, the building deeds, the Ortiz name. None of those lived where they thought they did. For the first time, I realized something. They had been treating the buildings like they were the business. But the real business, its systems, its relationships, its structure, lived wherever I decided to anchor it. And I still had the legal authority to move that anchor. Power of attorney doesn't just give you the right to sign their names. It gives you the duty to protect what they can't see clearly anymore. I thought about the people whose paychecks depended on us. The suppliers who'd been patient when my father's hospital bills made everything late. The customers who came not because of our logo, but because of how they were treated on bad days. They didn't need my family name. They needed stability. They needed someone who understood that a brand is only as ethical as the systems beneath it. So I did what I'd done every time something broke. I quietly began building. It started with a conversation, not with a lawyer, with a woman named Gloria. Gloria owned a small cafe 3 streets over. Technically, we were competitors. In reality, we swapped bags of sugar when one of us miscalculated, shared horror stories about health inspections, and covered for each other's staff during emergencies. She'd been in the business longer than my parents. She knew how people could be. We met after closing time, in her empty shop that smelled like burnt caramel and oversteeped tea. She poured us both coffee and watched me over the rim of her mug. "So," she said, not bothering with small talk. "What did they do?" I told her. Not everything, just enough. She listened, expression smoothing out into something not quite surprise, not quite sympathy, more like recognition. You think this is about them choosing him over you, she said slowly when I finished. I opened my mouth to argue. It was about that. Of course it was, but she shook her head. Oh, it is, she agreed, but it's also about something else. Your parents think the sign on the window is the business. She tapped the table between us. It's not. The business is whoever shows up when things go wrong. Gloria recommended a nonprofit attorney who'd helped her set up a community kitchen program years ago. She understands control, Gloria said, and how to let it go without burning everything down. Her name was Dr. Lucia Pena. She had salt gray hair pulled into a twist at the nape of her neck and a way of reading documents that made you feel seen and audited at the same time. I brought her my lists. She read in silence, occasionally underlining a phrase, circling a date, asking for clarification on a contract term. When she finally looked up, she said one sentence I didn't realize I'd been trying not to think. They're making decisions with less capacity than you. She meant my parents' health, but we both knew she didn't just mean that. Lucia leaned back, fingers steepled. You're trying to protect yourself, she said, and I understand that, but the law doesn't really care about your feelings. I swallowed. Of course it didn't. Here's what the law does care about, she continued. She tapped the stack of vendor contracts with one hand and the health inspection guidelines with the other. Duty of care, continuity of service, accountability for vulnerable workers, transparent governance. My chest tightened. Your father's original mission statement, she added, sliding a sheet of yellowed paper across the desk. Remember this? She did me bring the filing box with the earliest business paperwork. I hadn't even realized that mission statement was inside. To create a warm, affordable, dignified community space where anyone can find a seat at the table. It was written in my father's slanted handwriting, back when his dreams were bigger than his ego. If you still believe in that, Lucia said, we can build something that protects it, even from him. The solution wasn't revenge. It was structure. I would create a legal entity, a foundation not to own the property, but to hold the systems that made the cafes what they were. Recipes, training manuals, vendor relationships, brand standards, digital infrastructure. Everything my parents thought of as ours that actually lived in databases, documents, and habits I had shaped. Think of it as separating the bones from the paint, Lucia said. They can give away the color on the walls. You'll make sure the frame survives. We spent 3 weeks working. I stayed up late every night after my shifts, cross-referencing contracts. Lucia drew diagrams on a whiteboard in her office, connecting licenses to obligations to outcomes. We named it Hearthline Collective, not Ortiz anything, not family branded. Just a foundation with a simple purpose: to maintain ethical, sustainable cafe and bakery practices in vulnerable neighborhoods, to prioritize worker protections, to ensure that any use of our systems met specific standards, to keep the heart of the business from being exploited by whoever happened to own the walls. Under my authority as power of attorney, still valid, still uncontested, I moved things. Not secretly, legally. We transferred ownership of our training programs, recipe books, and supplier agreements to Hearthline. We reassigned our roasting profiles to the foundation as licensed intellectual property. We shifted the digital infrastructure, POS configurations, loyalty program data, internal standard operating procedures, so that they were no longer personal assets but collective ones. In return, Hearthline granted my parents' company a perpetual, no-cost license to use all that material, as long as they met the standards we set. If they failed those standards, if staffing dipped below agreed ratios, if wage policies fell out of compliance, if health scores dropped, Hearthline could revoke the license. Without it, the properties could still operate cafes, just not as Ortiz Hearth and Stone, not using our recipes, not serving our coffee. They'd be empty, pretty shells. Lucia insisted we get independent audits and medical evaluations confirming my parents' capacity at the time of signing. We will not give anyone a foothold to claim exploitation, she said. We brought in a social worker to explain the structure to them in plain language. My father nodded, distracted, more concerned about a delayed shipment of beans. My mother signed with a flourish, eager to get back to choosing table linens for the legacy brunch. "It's just formality," she said, tapping the pen against her lip. "Maya knows all that paperwork, we trust her." And for once, I let those words land exactly the way they sounded. We filed everything, registered Hearthline, transferred assets. I created a board that included not just me, but Gloria, our head baker, and a representative from a local housing nonprofit. People whose loyalty was to the mission, not to my family's name. Then I went back to work like nothing had changed. Because for a while, nothing did. The ovens still warmed the kitchen before dawn. The baristas still joked with regulars. Julian started showing up more often, sweeping through the cafe in new outfits, talking about brand partnerships and influencer campaigns. My parents glowed every time he walked into a room. I let them, because I knew what they were really giving him when they talked about passing the torch. A pretty room, without the fire that made it matter. The night of the legacy brunch came fast, the way holidays always seem to arrive when you've been too busy working to notice the calendar. They rented out the second floor of a trendy restaurant downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white tablecloths, candles that dripped beeswax slowly down gold holders, a live pianist in the corner playing versions of pop songs soft enough to feel classy. I got there early, not because I wanted to, because I'd been told to. "Family should be there to greet everyone," my mother had said on the phone, her voice bright. "Wear something nice. Dark green looks good on you." I stood near the window, watching the city flicker. The air smelled like rosemary and lemon from the open kitchen. Behind me, staff set out champagne flutes. Guests began trickling in. Former managers. Longtime suppliers. That couple who'd met in our cafe 15 years ago and now brought in their twins every Saturday. Our accountant. My father's cardiologist. It was like watching my life walk through the door in pieces. They all went to my parents first. Then to Julian. He stood near the center of the room, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and that easy, rehearsed smile. People clapped him on the shoulder, made jokes about finally taking the reins, told him how proud they were. When anyone turned to include me, he was quick. "Maya's the backbone," he'd say warmly, pulling me into a side hug like an award he'd just won. Couldn't have done any of this without her. Except he hadn't done it. I had. And I wasn't theirs to brand anymore. Dinner was a blur of clinking cutlery and polite laughter. Toasts. Stories of the early days, most of which conveniently forgot who had actually worked which shifts. Then, as dessert plates were cleared, my father stood. He didn't tap his glass. He just rose, hand resting on the back of Julian's chair, and the room fell quiet the way it always had when he wanted attention. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was softer than it used to be, but still carried. "When we opened the first hearth and stone cafe, we just hoped we'd make enough to pay rent and give our kids something to be proud of." He squeezed Julian's shoulder. "Tonight," he continued, "we're making it official. We're passing ownership of the business to Julian. He is the future of our brand." Applause rose, loud and enthusiastic. My mother dabbed her eyes. Julian looked humble in the way people do when they've already practiced looking surprised in the mirror. When the clapping subsided, my father gestured toward a server, who stepped forward carrying that leather folder. "The papers are ready," my father said. "Symbolic tonight, legal tomorrow, but this is the moment our legacy continues." He pushed the folder toward my brother. Julian put his hand on it. The room leaned in. That's when I stood. Not abruptly. Just enough to make my chair legs scrape against the floor, a small sound that somehow cut through the piano music and the leftover laughter. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "this is the moment our legacy changes." A few heads turned. My parents' smiles faltered. I set 3 things on the table in front of me: my ring of cafe keys, a copy of the power of attorney document, and a thick, sealed envelope with Julian's name written on the front in my neat, blocky handwriting. The keys landed first. The metal rang in the soft room like a bell, then rolled slightly before coming to rest. "Maya," my mother said slowly, her fingers tightening around her napkin. "What are you doing?" I slid the keys toward Julian. "These are yours," I said. "All the stores, all the alarm codes, every front door." Some guests smiled, thinking this was part of the ceremony. I pushed the power of attorney document next, letting it sit at the center of the table, the legal language clearly visible under the overhead light. And this, I added quietly, was mine. Julian frowned, looking from the paper to me. We know, you've been amazing with everything. I nodded once. Then I lifted the envelope with his name and looked at him directly. This, I said, is what you think you're inheriting. I didn't hand it to him. I placed it carefully on the table in front of my father instead. You might want to read it out loud, I suggested. Everyone here deserves to know what they're celebrating. Silence fell heavy as velvet. My father's hand trembled when he picked up the envelope. His eyes flicked to my mother, then to Julian, then to me. Somewhere in the side of the room, a wineglass clinked against another by accident and someone murmured an apology. He opened it, pulled out a stack of papers and stapled summaries. His eyes skimmed the top page. His face changed. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around his mouth, a narrowing of his eyes, the way he looked when a delivery arrived late and he knew it would throw the entire day off. What is this? He asked, voice suddenly less sure. He flipped to the next page, then the next. His breathing got louder, the way it had after his last stress test. My mother snatched a sheet from his hand and scanned it, her lipstick catching on her teeth as her mouth fell open. This says, she pressed one hand against her chest. This says the recipes, the training programs, the vendor relationships, they're owned by Hearthline Collective, I finished for her, keeping my voice even. A foundation that protects the ethical use of our systems. My father's head snapped up. We never, you did, a calm voice said from the far end of the table. Lucia stood there, setting down her water glass. She wore a simple black dress and a small name tag that read, Dr. Lucia Pena, Hearthline Board. Most people had assumed she was a doctor friend of my father's or some distant relative. Now all eyes turned toward her. She stepped closer, taking one of the documents from my father's shaking hand. As outlined here, she said, her tone that of someone explaining a policy, not delivering a blow. Mr. and Mrs. Ortiz signed the transfer of intellectual and operational property to Hearthline 3 years ago. At that time, Miss Maya Ortiz held full legal authority to act on their behalf regarding business continuity. My father's voice cracked. You tricked us. Lucia's brow furrowed, genuinely offended. No, she said. You were advised. Independently. In writing. And the purpose was clear. To protect your stated mission and the livelihoods of your staff and community. We have the recorded conversations and third-party assessments if anyone would like to review them. Julian looked like the room had just tilted under his feet. So what exactly did they just give me? He asked, each word slow. Lucia glanced at me. I nodded. She turned back to the room. Your parents have transferred ownership of the physical cafe properties and their associated debt to you, she said. The buildings, the equipment, the brand trademarks, subject to license. Subject to what? My mother whispered. Lucia lifted another page. The use of the Ortiz Hearth and Stone name, recipes, supplier contracts, training systems, and roasting profiles is licensed from Hearthline Collective, she recited. Continued use of that license is conditional. Conditional on what? Julian's voice was thinner now, the confident host gone, leaving just my younger brother in his place. On maintaining the standards Miss Ortiz designed and has upheld for the last 11 years, Lucia said. Fair wages, minimum staffing ratios, safe scheduling practices, compliance with health and safety regulations at or above current levels, accessible pricing for certain menu items, community space usage requirements. She folded her hands. If those standards are not met, Hearthline can revoke the license with 60 days' notice. At that point, you may still operate cafes using your buildings and equipment. You just won't be able to use the Ortiz brand, recipes, or systems that your customers currently recognize. My father stared at me face pale. So we have nothing, he said hoarsely. You have what you always valued most, I replied softly. The appearance of ownership. Someone near the end of the table inhaled sharply. My mother shook her head, curls trembling. You can't do this to your family. I didn't do this to my family, I said. I did this for the business, for the workers, For the people who will still need paychecks when you and I are gone. Julian clutched the folder like a lifeline. This is revenge, he said, eyes bright, voice shaking. You're punishing us because they chose me. For a second, something in my chest twisted. He really believed that. No, I said quietly. I'm finally refusing to be punished for holding everything up. Lucia stepped back, giving me space. I picked up the power of attorney document from the table and folded it once, twice. It felt lighter than it had the day I first signed it. I'm resigning as your representative, I told my parents. Effective immediately, Hearthline has its own council and governance. You and Julian can make whatever decisions you like about your properties. I met my father's eyes. You just don't get to take everyone else down with you if you choose wrong. The pianist had stopped playing somewhere around the word licensed. The restaurant was utterly silent now. No one dropped a fork. No one shifted in their chair. They just watched. My parents, Julian, me, the mess we'd been building for years finally visible under decent lighting. I turned to the guests, the people who had, for better or worse, been part of this story. If anyone here wants to know what Hearthline is, I said, or how we're going to keep serving this community, my email is on the last page of that packet. I'll answer any questions you have. I just won't be doing it. I gestured vaguely toward my parents, from here anymore. I didn't wait for permission. I pulled my chair back, lifted my bag from the floor, and walked out. No slammed doors. No shouting. Just soft footsteps on hardwood and the quiet hum of the city waiting outside. People always imagine that after a scene like that, everything explodes in slow motion. It doesn't. It unravels. The next morning there were emails, some from staff forwarding messages they'd received overnight. Confusion, panic, rumors that we were closing. Rumors that we were franchising. Rumors that I had stolen the business. I replied to each one with the same calm explanation I'd given Lucia during our planning stages. The cafes would stay open as long as standards were met. Their jobs were safe under Hearthline agreements. Their wages were protected. If that ever changes, I wrote, you'll hear it from me directly, not through a relative or a screenshot. Some suppliers called. We follow the coffee, one of them joked weakly. And the contracts. They continued delivering. Customers noticed things first in the smallest ways, less of my father behind the counter, more of Julian pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. My name off certain emails, onto others. I moved my physical office out of the back of the main cafe and into a small shared space above a community theater 3 blocks away. The walls were thin. Sometimes I could hear rehearsal lines drifting through the floorboards. It felt right. I held Hearthline's first official board meeting there. Gloria brought empanadas. Our head baker cried when she realized she wasn't going to be quietly replaced by someone more on brand. The housing nonprofit rep asked pointed questions about our wage commitments. We voted on everything. It felt like oxygen. 2 weeks later, I walked past the original cafe on my way home. Through the front window, I saw my parents sitting at their usual corner table. No one was talking to them. My father stared down at a stack of papers. My mother fiddled with a sugar packet until it tore in half, granules spilling across the tablecloth. They looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. I didn't go in, not out of cruelty, because there was nothing left for me to fix in that room. A month after that, I saw Julian. He was in the kitchen of our second location. Well, his now, with his sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the fabric down his back. The line was backed up. 2 baristas were out sick. The dishwasher had quit mid-shift. He was standing at the dish pit, up to his elbows in suds. He didn't see me through the side alley window. For a strange, aching second, I almost went in, almost picked up a towel, almost helped him like I'd helped everyone my whole life. Instead, I watched him rinse off a stack of plates, jaw tight, then step over to the line and burn his hand slightly on a hot pan because he forgot where the handle rested. He hissed in pain, shook his hand out, then got back to work. I walked away, again not out of spite, because that kitchen wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to whoever chose to stand inside it. Hearthline's work grew slowly, not in flashy, fun ways, in small, steady ones. We started a training program for young people aging out of foster care, teaching them cafe skills and helping them get first jobs in places that wouldn't exploit them. We helped 2 other cafes in the neighborhood set up similar systems, licensing some of our procedures in exchange for their commitment to community pricing structures. We audited ourselves twice as harshly as the city did. People online started talking not about Ortiz Hearth and Stone, but about that network of cafes that pay better and don't kick you out if you sit with one coffee for 3 hours. My parents' properties struggled. Word eventually got around that the brand license was conditional. Some investors who'd been sniffing around backed off. My parents started skipping small repairs. The paint peeled. The bathrooms grew a little grimier. They tried to cut staff. Hearthline sent them notice. They hired again. The tension between what they wanted, profit, legacy, control, and what the structure allowed, care, ethics, accountability, tightened around them like a too small shirt. One afternoon, I had to visit their accountant's office for a separate matter. As I stepped into the building lobby, I saw them sitting on a bench against the far wall. They looked tired. My father's hair had gone more gray since the brunch. My mother's lipstick was smudged at the corner. They were holding hands, fingers woven together the way they used to after long nights at the original cafe when things were simpler. They didn't see me. I could have walked over, could have said something, could have offered to help with whatever they were there for. I didn't, not out of anger, because our relationship for the first time wasn't built on me stepping in the second things got hard. I got in the elevator, pushed the button, let the doors close. Some stories end with a dramatic victory, a lawsuit won, a company seized, a villain publicly shamed. Mine didn't. My story ended with more space than noise, the space in my schedule where panic used to live, the space in my chest where resentment used to sit, the space in my life where my parents' approval used to be the only light I could see. Hearthline grew into those spaces. So did I. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I still wake up at 4, my body convinced I need to start proofing dough or checking ovens. Old habits cling that way. Now, instead, I make coffee in my small apartment kitchen, sit at my second-hand table, and open my laptop to a different kind of work. Grant proposals, training modules, anonymous feedback forms from baristas who know I won't forward their complaints to a relative who will hold them against them. The cafes, theirs and ours, keep opening their doors each day. People order coffee, they sit, they talk, they heal, they get hurt, they come back. Life moves quiet and relentless. A year after the Legacy brunch, I attended a small community event at one of the Allied Hearthline cafes. They were hosting a reading night for local poets. The air smelled like chai and old books. Someone's toddler kept wandering up to the microphone. As I was leaving, I saw Julian again, sitting near the back, a notebook open in front of him. He'd lost weight, his hair was longer. There were dark circles under his eyes. He caught my gaze. For a second, we just looked at each other. He stood, hesitated, then approached. "I read everything," he said without preamble. His voice was quieter than it used to be. "The agreements, the minutes, the mission statements." I nodded. "Lucia explained more," he added. "About duty of care, about how much you were doing, always." He swallowed hard. "I thought you were just good at fixing things," he said. "I didn't realize we'd built our whole lives on you never saying no." Something in my chest loosened. "I didn't realize either," I admitted. "Not until I stopped." We stood in that small space, surrounded by people reading their hearts into microphones, and for the first time in our adult lives, we spoke to each other without our parents in the room. "I'm trying," he said, eyes shining, "to keep the standards, to deserve the license. It's harder than I thought." "It's supposed to be hard," I replied. "That's how you know it's doing something real." He let out a rough laugh. "Are we," he began, then faltered. "Are we okay?" I thought about all the nights I'd carried him, figuratively and literally, through spaces he never saw. "We're getting there," I said. "That's enough for now." He nodded, didn't push. Didn't ask me to fix anything. Just went back to his seat. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the sound of a shaky poem following me out the door. In the end, there was no final reckoning. No public meltdown. No viral video of me calling anyone out. There was just a line drawn, clearly and quietly, between what was mine to hold and what never should have been. Families tend to fracture loudly. Shouts at tables, slammed doors, dramatic exits. But the boundaries that heal you, those settle like dust, soft, inevitable, impossible to sweep away once you finally stop pretending you're the one keeping everything intact. Freedom didn't come from taking the business. It came from refusing to be the invisible structure holding up people who refused to see me. It came from stepping out of scenes I'd never agreed to be in. It came from walking away without turning around to make sure everyone else was still comfortable. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all. And sometimes the silence that follows is the only truth that ever mattered.